in a poverty consciousness state, everybody should have the ability to have food and water and relatively free energy, if not free. And that's the big problem that's going to happen because the oil has been clung to for so long and the electricity so that it can be metered.
Yeah.
And we're just on the verge of getting the technologies out there. If they'd stop killing off the people, then
your big impediment.
I mean, they have the technology locked away in deep vaults, yes, and they're probably using it in spaceships going to Mars and the Moon, but we don't have it. So, us little cartoon characters out here in the world have to kind of get by and hope that enough people come up with a similar solution at the same time so they can't kill everybody.
That's kind of the way that things work, though, in the sense that the universe is not as people would conceive of it. Because, for instance, everybody I've talked to that was in the thinking and invention business, and even if you read Buckminster Fuller's Critical Path, and I can't think of the other earlier one he wrote about his process, but everybody that's in the thinking business, they all acknowledge that, they don't own ideas, and the concept of an original idea is kind of a misnomer. And the way I think of it is that I happen to have a particular set of skills that cause neurons to fire a particular way in my brain at the grosser material level. And that is represented by energetic activity at a higher level, and that energetic activity acts as an antenna for specific kinds of ideas. So there's a whole lot of ideas that I would never ever conceive of, no matter how hard I may try and think in particular ways, simply because my brain doesn't work that way. But there's probably dozens and dozens and dozens of humans just in, a 5-state region here that have the same kind of thinking patterns that I do that get a lot of these ideas, and they do different things with them, or circumstances prevents them from, going and pursuing them. But that being the case, if we think of these things as waves, then every washing through of the wave for us is going to be that much larger. And I actually think that that's one of the things that the powers that be fear, is that the exponential compounding effect that humans have with each other. So, for instance, give me one element of free energy or anti-gravity, and I'll give you the other. Once we've got either of those, then the universe is ours as to be as we make it, and once we start promulgating this technology, then we could seriously, for instance, redesign humanity and how we decide to work stuff out amongst us.
Oh yeah, that I totally agree with you, and plus it would be so exciting that people wouldn't want to be sitting on a couch, watching games. Life would be an exciting adventure that was unfolding in each moment of the now, rather than a horrible nightmare that we've created and allowed because of our passivity and a variety of other problems.
Well, we have to, I don't know that we can take responsibility that way and cast ourselves as victims. I'm not into that. My approach is to say that we've been duped and we've been poisoned, which impacts our neural capacities. We've been vaccinated and all of this kind of stuff, and it was all done deliberately. There's a certain amount of acquiescence if you continue to accept it, but, I cut humans some slack because we've been basically sold a bill of goods from the minute we're born, and all of society is cooperating with it. So it's awful hard to break out of that.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. The generational thing that goes on with the bloodlines, the powers that be have the advantage of being around for thousands of years, prior to and after our being here. So we come in forgetting, and we're kept forgetting from the moment we come in. So, well,
plus they do other things, like do everything they can to shorten the lifespan so that you don't have the ability to have multi-generational, effective, meaningful contact that way,
That's right. And then on top of that, making trillions of dollars off of pharmaceuticals by keeping us alive with diseases that they create.
in order to sell you the treatment, not the cures. Right. And then in the meantime, they're spewing out, Alzheimer's by the ton into the upper atmosphere,
Yeah, absolutely.
So, hey, we've got to understand we've got a heavy load against us.
Yeah,
this is a very real war. We are somehow, I think, a prize in this war. That's the curious part of it. We're not a pawn. We are pawns, but that's not the limit of what humanity is going through here, because the logical thought experiments would suggest otherwise. If we were mere pawns, we would have been done away with a long time ago for being inept, basically, Yeah. But we're entering very interesting times now relative to what's going to happen locally to people in the U.S. and then throughout the rest of the former Anglo-American Empire. And what people don't understand is that what is occurring in Egypt now is the equivalent of Spain kicking out the Romans prior to the first of the major collapses of the Roman Empire. That kind of thing. It's not a tribal issue. It's a group of people that got together and decided they just didn't want to deal with it anymore. In this case, of course, we're at the center of that empire here in the United States. Even if you don't want it, believe it, ever thought about it, you participate in it, just living here and paying taxes and so on. Powers that be have been using us to clamp down on the rest of the planet, and it's all falling apart. Now, Jay Widener thinks that it's falling apart because the true bastards, the one that pulled the strings for the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, the ones that make them sit up and say, yes, sir, how high, those guys have left, he thinks, leaving us with just the local muscle and minions who really aren't all that competent, and so all this other stuff is starting to break loose.
And that his part of his theory too is that they're just operating kind of without the control that they had before, so they're kind of hit and miss. And going to make different and rather interesting mistakes. That would lead, yes, of course. And when you're living with a system that's designed to control from the top down, and it's starting to fall apart, then that seems that would unravel fairly quickly, especially when you have people vying for the top position, because there's only one that can be at the very top of the pyramid.
Right, yeah.
And so I don't...
Sure, the whole Praetorian Guard, which colonel is it this week that's going to try and be Caesar?
Right. But I can't help but feel that that's all interconnected to the space wars that you and others are talking about and seeing that are going on, and possibly in other, I know it sounds kooky, but in other dimensions that we're not able to
Well, lots of people say other dimensions, and from my viewpoint, that language should be clarified. Because if you say another dimension, to me, that has a context of you could, for instance, imagine yourself stepping from this dimension into that other dimension as though through a Stargate kind of an apparatus or a shimmery mirror kind of a thing, or wavy air or something, right?
Yeah.
Okay, now, in my understanding of universe, what happens is this. We've got 22 trillion pulses per second coming from the middle of universe going into basically the middle of every single item within the universe. It starts off and goes from the middle of universe and jumps into the instantaneously with no time, because this pulse does not travel through time, but travels and propels time itself. This pulse comes and hits the middle of all the suns. And from the suns, it goes out to the middle of all of the objects within their solar system. Everything gets pulsed by this. So this 22 trillion times a second is the basic beat, if you will, of the universe, the basic vibratory frequency. Now, everything within the universe operates at some subset of that. And our poor brains, limited by the five-sense mind, of visual acuity basically being the limiting factor, we operate at basically, as we know from the movies, you can trick us into, if we see enough still pictures fast enough, we think there's moving action. And this is movies and video, et cetera, et cetera. And so our brains operate at maybe, if you're really, 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 really good with your eyes, it may be as fast as 60 frames a second instead of the 22 trillion. So for us, another dimension is actually the 61st frame per second speed.
Mm-hmm.
For most people, it'd be 35 frames per second or 45 because their eyes don't allow them to operate that fast.
Mm-hmm.
But imagine a hummingbird, flapping its wings in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
It may flap those things at 2,000 beats per second. You're not going to visually perceive them, and
right.
that's the actual other dimension. There is no other vibratory frequency that is just ever so slightly different from ours that we can't perceive it, that we could somehow step into within our body. So I don't see interdimensionality, if you will, correctly expressed in the language around me relative to what the physics are. Interdimensionality would have, for instance, the reptilians could operate at a mere 100 frames per second and still be operating 40 frames per second faster than us, and we would never perceive them. And they could be here in the same physical space, although to our frame of reference, they wouldn't be here in the same physical time.
Right, right.
Okay, and but that's actually what we're describing when we say another dimension.
I'm glad you clarified that, because that's one of the things that David Icke talks about a lot, and that you just put it into a context and in words that make sense. That it's a vibrational thing.
Yeah, and so if you could actually, shove some juice into you, electricity, and get yourself vibrating a whole lot faster, you might see some stuff. Of course, it'd be, maybe a one-way trip to seeing it, but hey, here's something else. The frequency of light within the material universe is variable, the speed of light. The frequency within light varies, and we can separate by way of prisms. We can separate light into various frequencies, and we call these various colors, like red, orange, etc. Well, in the Vietnam era, the military, from whatever source, we won't need to speculate on that, got the bright idea of using night vision devices. And these were big then because we didn't really have the small integrated circuit boards and so on, even though they were really pushing that frontier. And the night vision devices that they used red filters. So get this, they didn't last long in the combat arena. I think they probably were on site in country, as they say, maybe 2.5 months in total distribution only to a small number of troops. And I can't believe that they made it out of testing, but somehow they did. And they gave some of these poor troops the functional equivalent of a night vision goggles, including some helicopter pilots. And the reports that the helicopter pilots made that wore these things with the red filters were that they were seeing and reacting to objects that they saw flying around that they couldn't see with their eyes, that they said weren't helicopters and weren't bugs. And that's what the military tried to tell them, was that you're seeing bugs. And the guy says, no, excuse me, I know the difference between a moth and a flying crocagator,